Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Threshold, which is episode 15 of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as requested by my viewers. This review was requested by Amy Rat 15. So, Threshold was the episode in which the Voyager crew are conducting tests to try to break the Warp 10 barrier, which is a theoretical impossibility as it means you could be at all places in the universe at the same time, which means if they were successful in doing so, they could use the technology to get Voyager home. After finding some unspecified material in the Delta Quadrant, Tom Paris now thinks it's possible to break the barrier, and after getting a pep talk from Neelix, Paris and Kim find the inspiration they need to break the threshold, and they do so successfully in test on the holodeck. So they then prepare to run the test with an actual shuttle, and due to some concerns from the Doctor, Janeway wants to send Harry Kim on the test run, but Paris talks her into letting him go. So the test is successful and Paris returns home a hero. Everybody believes that not only is this their ticket home, but it will also redefine the way of life throughout the galaxy. That is, until Paris starts exhibiting strange symptoms, water becomes toxic, and even oxygen does as well. Paris then starts to change into a strange monster being and goes a bit insane. After dying, he comes back to life and abducts Captain Janeway and takes her on a shuttle to run the Warp 10 experiment again. Eventually, Chakotay and Voyager track them down to a planet where they discover that Paris and Janeway evolved into strange lizard beings, in which state they mated and had children, these little lizard children. They then bring Paris and Janeway back on board the ship and manage to change them back to normal while leaving their lizard babies down on the planet. So, one of my favorite YouTube channels, Chris Stuckman, will often do reviews for horrible movies, which he calls hilariosity reviews. I wasn't about to steal the name from him for this review because that would be a bit cheap. However, the principle for this review will be the same, which I'm sure is what Amy Rat was thinking of when she suggested this episode, as this is seen as one of the worst Star Trek episodes ever, and for good reason. I almost cracked up a bit just reading the end of that synopsis of this episode, especially the ending. Now, I've never been a fan of movies that are so bad that they're good. It's never really been my thing. However, if it is your thing, then you may enjoy watching this episode. Fun fact though, this wasn't my number 1 on my 5 worst Voyager episodes countdown. This was my number 3 behind The Fight, which to me is an even more absurd episode that was just awful, and Endgame mainly for all the potential that it squandered and how it was the largest disappointment in Trek history. Threshold did have its moments, and I'll put forth, had it not been for the absolutely ridiculous ending, people probably wouldn't have hated this episode as much as they do, and it would be just another average subpar Voyager episode. But yeah, that ending was a huge stinker and one of the worst in the entire series. But personally, I think most of the episode was horrible as well, but it's, that outrageous ending that really does it in. So first, let me tackle the whole Warp 10 barrier thing. Apparently this is a concept Gene Roddenberry himself came up with when he first envisioned Star Trek The Next Generation, and while it was never explicitly stated in the show before, it was included in a lot of technical manuals and other official Star Trek books and supplements. However, there are multiple examples of ships moving faster in Warp 10, as there were several examples in the original series of ships under extraordinary circumstances going Warp 12, and in the Next Generation finale, All Good Things, the Future Enterprise had a speed of Warp 13. And indeed, personally, the concept of Warp 10 being an infinite speed that lets you be everywhere at once seems really ridiculous to me, and I think it bears little resemblance to actual science, so the whole premise to begin with I thought was pretty ridiculous. And I know what they were going for in this episode, a Cronenberg-esque dark story of transformation. Many compare this to the 1986 movie The Fly, and it was quite a cheap imitation of that. And I can't say I was a fan at all of this story and how it played out. They didn't really seem to establish it well or make it have any sense. It's just like all of a sudden, after running an experiment, Paris starts turning into a monster and acting all crazy. It's so cliche. Nothing in this episode was established to make it a tad bit unique. And of course, any credibility this storyline might have had was completely wiped clean by this ridiculous ending. And an Easter egg for Season 2 Voyager DVD released in 2003, producer Brenna Brega, who wrote the episode, officially apologized for it, saying, quote, "This was a royal steaming stinker." He did say, that he felt it was unfortunate that fans had always associated him with this episode, as he's written over 100 episodes, some of them quite good, so he thinks it's a bit unfair that they hold this one failure against him. And actor Robert Duncan McNeil, who plays Tom Paris, once stated that when he first heard that they were going ahead with this episode, he was really surprised that they were actually doing it. And indeed, this seems like one of those ideas you hear about, episodes that they're considering making but never actually make because they never fully develop it, but they just made it anyway. This is an inevitable side effect of having to do 24 episodes in 1 year, and a show like this where sometimes some underdeveloped bad ideas will slip through in order to fulfill their quota. But yeah, this is one of the worst examples. But it's also interesting to note this episode won an Emmy, albeit it was for makeup, so it had nothing to do with the horrible story, but still, that means that this episode is officially an award-winning episode. But as to whether this episode has any value as a "it's so bad it's good" watch, kind of like The Room or Birdemic, it's hard for me to say, I'm not the best person to make that determination, as I've never really been a fan of those kinds of watches. One thing that would be holding this episode back, that other movies like the ones I mentioned, or like Superman 4 The Quest for Peace or Plan 9 from Outer Space have, is that this episode doesn't actually have cheap production value like those movies does. The production value of this episode is as great as the rest of the series, as the Emmy indicates. So it kind of holds it back from the cheese factor that the other movies like that have. But what this episode does have that's really cheesy is the story and, of course, the dialogue. However, I could actually see a bunch of people like drinking and yelling along with this ridiculousness of the episode when Paris is going crazy in sickbay. For example, there's one scene in particular where he just randomly yells out, "Pepperoni pizza!" And you're just like, what? He then asks Cass to kiss him while he's dying, which is also cheesy as fuck, and then once he does die, she does kiss him. Yeah, that's smart. Kiss the slimy mutated freak who just died of an unknown cause. Good call. And of course, the biggest laugh out loud moment would be the ending with the lizards. But yeah, overall, barring a few really bad cheesy moments, I say the majority of this episode plays out like a cliched, below average episode of Voyager, which is more boring than cheesy. I actually think this episode, The Fight, would have a much more entertainment value as a "it's so bad it's good" episode, as I was literally laughing my ass off when watching a particular scene in that episode. It was so goddamn cheesy, it was amazing. So, my rating for Threshold out of 10 is, of course, a 1, the worst. And just to clarify, 1 is my lowest rating, as I don't do zeros. So yeah, this episode, reputation is very well deserved, as it's a prime example on why the writers should be more careful about making sure all the scripts are fully developed before allowing them to move forward to production. However, I don't think it really works, all that well as a "it's so bad it's good" watch, as most of the episode is just boring and cringeworthy rather than outright cheesy. But don't get me wrong, it definitely has its cheesy moments. So that's it for my review of Threshold. If there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review, but 1 episode request per person, please. And be aware I am a little backed up at the moment, so it will be several months before I can get to your request. Also, be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as I cover shows like Game of Thrones, Vikings, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.